that there are 4 inspirational and timely themes to our conference. Each of this afternoon's speakers will talk with knowledge and passion in relation to one of these streams. The first stream is ageing and aged care, a vital part of the ongoing work of the Alliance. Our first speaker is Brian Hurd. Brian has told us he is an ageing but passionate lawyer. We suggest that he is an ageing and passionate lawyer and partner with the Brisbane law firm CRH Law. He practices in elder law or law relating to older people and is regarded as one of Australia's leading lawyers in the area. He has extensive experience in legal issues impacting on older people, including life and estate administration, disputes over wills, superannuation, social security, retirement living and aged care, incapacity and disability law, age discrimination, the guardianship regime, elder abuse, enduring powers of attorney, family agreements, disputes and mediation. Whew. With so much knowledge, Brian, your words, I am sure, will inform our work across Australia. Thank you.
Can I ask you to do 2 things for me, please? Firstly, can you put your hands together like this? Close your eyes and remember that feeling. Open your eyes, unclasp your hands, turn to the person next to you and ask them if you can hold their hand. If you're in between 2 people, greed is good. Ask the person on the other side as well. Having grasped their hands, having grasped their hands, having grasped their hands, and shutting up, close your eyes. Close your eyes. Now remember that sensation. Open your eyes. Let go. Let go. And ask yourself this question. Which of those 2 sensations were tinged with a little bit of titillation? A touch of expectation, pregnant with possibilities. Which of them brought a smile to your face? Hands up those who thought the second experience. Congratulations, you are human beings. Hands up those who thought the first experience. Condolences, you're not. Ladies and gentlemen, this is about touching. Touching in aged care. There is a cleavage in aged care. In aged care, we have private lives being played out in public. Have you noticed that? And I want to talk about touching in aged care. Not clinical touching, not wiping, washing, lifting, picking up, putting down, dropping, or as I saw recently in some care notes from an aged care facility, an assisted fall. A staff member had assisted a person to fall. I'd love to work and play in that aged care. If I could get an assisted fall every day, I'd be very happy. This is about sexual contact, sexual relationships in aged care. Something we find difficult to talk about. Who do you think would have said this in an aged care facility? I always look for a man under the bed at night. Just the thought that there might be makes me feel better. Isn't that wonderful? What sort of person would have said this in an aged care facility? I can remember it and sometimes even think about it, but now I am managed. Now I am managed. Who would have said this in an aged care facility? If it gave us trouble, we just gave it a whack with a cold spoon. That usually did the trick and deflated the bugger. And then we washed it in kerosene, they could have added. This was a person who suffered from a condition called priapism. Have you heard of priapism? It's where you have an inconvenient erection all the time, a constant erection. It's a medical condition. It's life-threatening. This was there dealing with priapism. Who would have said this in an aged care facility? Seriously, You'd think in their twilight years these people would have better things to do than shag, like writing their histories. Just what I love to do when I'm in a residential aged care is writing my history. The law. The law. This is the cleavage, see? Unfortunately, this is a quote from an aged care don, a director of nursing. Unfortunately, we have to treat sex in high care as just another form of assault, and we have to report it. Touching is now terrifying. Terrifying in aged care because it's a reportable assault. Who disagrees with this statement? Any adult at any age, at any time, in any private place has the right to safe, consensual sexual expression. Congratulations, madam, you're the only person to put your hand up. You disagree with that, do you? Look at the question. We lawyers like detail. Look at the question. Who disagrees with this? Older people may think sex is important, be sexually active, have more than one partner, masturbate, have same-sex partners, use Viagra, hide their sexuality, want to express their sex, and become depressed if they can't express it. Old people like me and you. Who disagrees with that? No one. Who disagrees with this? All older people are asexual, can't get it up, uninterested, heterosexual, monogamous, don't want to discuss their sexual health, and they think they're perverted if they think about sex. Well done. You get biscuits. What is actually sex in aged care? What is it? Because it's not just copulation. I work a lot in aged care, and sexual expression is not just about the sexual copulation act. It comes with all sorts of implications and nuances. It can be cuddling, canoodling, intimacy, whispering sweet nothings, kissing, eye fluttering, fondling, holding hands, hanging out, sex and attempts, massaging, masturbating, sex toys, pornography, and a paid service. There's a company called The Company Company. Have you heard of The Company Company? It's a business that provides company for older people, all sorts of company. There's an organisation called Rent a Heart, Hire a Friend. There's an aged care facility in America who put out tender for what they call comfort services for their aged care residents, where you can tender to provide comfort services for aged care residents. Does that happen in Australia? Only in Tasmania, apparently. Never heard of it in Australia, ever. What we know to be true about sex, these are truisms. Sexual expression in old age are not mutually exclusive. Sexual needs do not decline with age. In fact, the last instinct, I'm told, that dies just before we draw our last breath is our sexual instinct. Do you know that? It's the last instinct to die before we die. Sexual intimacy provides many physical and psychosocial benefits. It does. It makes you feel good to be tactile, touchy, in love. Sexual care is a foreign phrase in aged care. If anyone works in aged care in this room, I bet you'd never use the phrase sexual care in aged care, ever. Because enter passion killer number one in aged care. It's care itself. It's a killer. Why? Because resident sexuality is taboo, just like weight loss. Weight loss is taboo in aged care too. God, if Mavis is losing weight, look out, there'll be hell to pay. But it's a natural function of being very old. You lose interest in food, you lose weight. It's too private to be discussed. It rarely features in care plans. If you've got parents in aged care, but you don't have sexual care as part of the care plan. It's more managed than facilitated. Doesn't really fall into clinical care. It's all Webster packs, no condom packs. It's counterintuitive, isn't it, to the whole thrust of aged care. Why are you in aged care? Because we're going to manage your decline, not satisfy your desires. It's all flaccid, where the people marinate in loneliness and their mantra is, God, just take me. Whereas, if there was a bit of fluorescence, they might say something like, Gigi, ravish me, or Gerald, ravish me. Ever heard anyone say that in an aged care facility? They just say, God, take me. The problem with care also extends to the built environment. That's why they talk about in aged care, the built environment. It means the building where people live. There's no quiet time rooms in aged care facilities, no resident lockable rooms, no knock and wait policies. There's a residential aged care facility in Australia that I acted for recently where they have 38 residents, 36 women and 2 men. The family of the 2 men have been laying constant complaints with the management that their fathers cannot get a good night's sleep. Why? Because some of the 36 women are secretly and furtively entering their rooms at night seeking conjugal bliss, one after the other. And they cannot get a good night's sleep. And you know why? It's because they can't lock their doors from the inside. And that's the local council regulation. You can't lock your doors on a residential aged care facility room from the inside. So how are we going to solve that problem? They have to be lockable from the inside and the outside. So someone can access if necessary, but they can also lock the inside to keep out the marauders. There are single beds with bed rails. Ever had sex with bed rails on a single bed? Very conducive to intimacy it is, having a good set of bed rails on a single bed. What about a 4-bedroom, the old style aged care facility, where you can have an orgy? Not very conducive, not very conducive. Using lazy language in caring as well. This is what staff say about people who act out sexually. They call them people who suffer from challenging behaviour. Challenging behaviour. Or acting out. Or they describe a sexual contact between residents as a resident-to-resident altercation. This is the euphemism of aged care because we don't want to talk about sex. We don't. Or he's just a Lothario, I saw written once in some care notes. He's just a Lothario. The problem with care, there's no staff or resident education on sexual expression. There isn't. There's no care courage. Staff are not very brave in the face of marauding, hovering families, accusing the facility of letting their mother or father engage in adultery. There's a famous case of a former justice of the US Supreme Court called Sandra Day O'Connor, whose husband was in advanced stages of dementia in a residential aged care facility. And he struck up a loving friendship with another elderly resident, and they were having sex. And the facility agonised for weeks about whether to tell Sandra that her husband was having an affair in a state of dementia. And eventually they plucked up the courage and said, Sandra, your husband's having an affair. And they could not believe her response. She said to them, quote, I am so happy, he's now happy. Isn't that wonderful? I'm so happy, he's now happy. They're still happily married, apparently. There's no creative care. Use of prostitutes or masseurs. Discouraged in aged care. If I pick up the phone in my residential aged care bed and ring for a prostitute and they walk through the door, what's the aged care facility's reaction going to be? I don't think so. Why not? Robotic masseurs now. We've got robots that can massage you. Why not? Aged care facilities going to take up that opportunity? I don't think so. Or tenders for comfort services that I mentioned before. The problem with care is the government as well. The government gets its nose into care and sexual expression as well. And the government has a very interesting position. On the one hand, the accreditation standards in aged care don't require aged care facilities to develop policies on resident sexuality. Accreditation audits avoid any assessment or mention of the word sex. But the curious thing is, the government, our Australian government, funded this document. This document is called the Sexuality Assessment Tool, ESAT. This document is meant to be used by aged care facilities in sexually assessing their residents and their sexual proclivities. How many aged care facilities do you reckon use this? About as many as on your two hands in Australia. It says up the top here, an initiative of the Australian government. The Australian government funded this for the aged care facilities that they fund to use this in sexually assessing their residents. Hardly used at all. So the government's sending two messages. Two messages. Don't talk about it, but here's something we can be seen to be doing even though you're not going to use it. They're your taxpayers' funds we're talking about here. The problem with carer providers, they're uncomfortable about talking about sex. And the evidence of that is in a survey from Victoria in 2009 of 826 aged care facilities. They surveyed these facilities and asked them a number of questions. How do you deal with intimacy and sexuality needs and information to residents? Look at the answers. 20% responded to say they had policies, but they were directed at problem or disruptive behaviour. There it is again. Sex is coitus interruptus or coitus disruptus in aged care. It's a problem. See, it's a problem. We just want you to die comfortably in decline, not act like a human being. 64% said they had no information. None. Can't help you, sorry. 7% said the research was inappropriate and intrusive. And 7 said, in answer to that question, the big N-A. Sexual expression in our facility is not applicable. How would you like your sexual relationship to be described as not applicable? Not applicable. N-A. It's a disgrace. And a passion killer number 2. The law. I'm here representing the law. The law is full of P words. It's paradoxical, it's paranoid, and it suffers from a significant psychosis. In a nutshell. Why? Because law is a threat, see? It's a threat. Aged care providers are so paranoid about not having complaints, even if those complaints are not legitimate, that they will do anything to suppress the possibility of a complaint. And they've got to deal with these legal push-pull factors. Like the law talks about capacity and the ability to consent to sexual relations. Very complex subject. Substitute decision makers, charter of rights and response. We throw all this into the legal pot. And somehow aged care providers and residents and their families have to determine what their rights are. So you've got, for example, the duty of care, I call it social control, in an aged care facility. And you've got families called helicopters. You've got helicopter families in your business where they hover. They hover over the facility, and the slightest transgression, the family lands with a thump. And look out, they'll race through your facility with an AK-47 Kalashnikov going off at 73 rounds a minute. And if mum's committing adultery, they will definitely land. The biggest law is the law of capacity. This is so important that most aged care facilities don't understand this. The law says this in every state of Australia and the territories and even in Tasmania. The law is this. Everyone who walks through or shuffles through an aged care facility is presumed to have the capacity to consent to anything. Anything. Including sexual relationships. Until there is evidence to the contrary. That's the law. The law. Everyone in this room is presumed capable of doing anything. Until there is evidence to the contrary. Sexual consent is not a big legal hurdle, is it? If I said to you, here's a mortgage debenture, have a read of that, and if you understand it, sign it. Or, here's a very attractive human being, do you want to have sex with them or not? Which do you think is a more complicated decision? The mortgage debenture or that body? That's the nature of capacity. It's a chameleon. Depends on the nature of the decision. If a resident with dementia is capable of deciding what to wear and what to eat, could they not also decide who they want to be with? Brian, I get this all the time. I'm just a lawyer who sits behind a desk and rabbits on in theories about what it's like to allow sexual expression in aged care. It's so easy for me to stand up here and feel like Dr. Feelgood. Why don't you come to, this is what they say, why don't you come to our facility and see what it's really like on the ground, bro? What it's really like on the ground. But if a resident's sexual expression is not harmful, abusive or illegal, it's good bloody care, isn't it? It's a part of good care in aged care. Because it's good for people to sexually express themselves if they so wish. It's good for them. It puts a smile on their face, it makes them happy. To suppress it makes them unhappy. And you're just comforting their decline. How do you know when it's not abusive? In aged care, they have to confront, and they have to have courage, and they have to conquer their demons. Because so much of this is so yucky and squeamish, isn't it? I don't particularly sit down with my parents and say, how's your sex life? But it's the same when parents go into aged care and their family comes in with them. Do you really want to sit there while your mum or your dad talks about their sexual desires, expressions, or proclivities? But it's got to be confronted. 80% of people in aged care are women. Women. That's an interesting sexual cohort when you think about it, when it comes to the men in aged care as well, or even LGBTI people in aged care. Now, you think it's hard being a heterosexual in aged care. What's it going to be like to be an LGBTI person in aged care? Huh? This is just basically about heterosexuals here. We haven't got to LGBTIs yet. Don't get old. Whatever you do, don't get old. Don't get to a stage where you've got to go to resident aged care if you're LGBTI. Your life will die with you. It's crucial for them to know about a resident's capacity. That's the crucial thing. When residents move into aged care, what's the capability of the person to make decisions? Policies are boring, particularly if the policy of the aged care facility is no sex, please, we're an aged care facility. And most of the denominational aged care facilities are a bit like that. Catholic aged care facilities, Lutheran aged care facilities. You can't mix religion with sex in aged care. The Hebrew Home Riverdale in America, you should go onto their website. They've got a sexual expression policy in their aged care facility. It's fascinating. Fascinating. They're very extolling, this Hebrew home, of people's abilities, wishes and desires being satisfied in their aged care facility. Fascinating. How to know? Staff education and training is one of the underutilised aspects of improving people's acceptance of sexual expression in aged care. It really is. If I had my way, I'd get staff in every aged care facility to watch that SBS production called The Scarlet Road. Ever seen The Scarlet Road? A few years ago, it was played on SBS. It was about a person with muscular dystrophy who used to have a prostitute come in once a month to provide sexual services to him. They had a program on it. It was fascinating. Every staff member of an aged care facility should watch that program. Should watch that program. What about resident education? Do you really need to tell an 85-year-old about sexually transmitted diseases? You do. You do. There's a place in America called The Villages. It's the largest retirement village in the world. A gated community of 31 square miles, 82,000 residents, 57,000 golf carts. And do you know what it's famous for? The highest rate of sexually transmitted diseases in America. This is a retirement village. A retirement village with the highest rate of sexually transmitted diseases in America. Just because you're old doesn't mean you can't get something. You may not get pregnant, but you can get something. And these people are from a generation where STDs weren't really part of the lingo, weren't part of everyday language. So they need education. So resident sexual education in aged care, what a revolutionary thought. Oh my God, Brian, what are you on about? I see a lot of sadness in aged care, lots of sadness. And a lot of that sadness comes from not being able to touch. Now for something completely different, from July last year, aged care became very competitive. Those who work in the aged care industry would know that. I challenge you tomorrow to go back to your facility and put an ad in the local newspaper which says this: why choose us for your aged care? We respect your right to sexual expression. We uphold your right to personal and sexual choices. We can facilitate male and female comfort companions. Interested? Phone. Now, who would have the courage to put an ad like that in the local newspaper advertising your services in your aged care facility? Huh? Come on, put your hands up. Come on. Just imagine you were the don in an aged care facility. Would you do it? Just imagine the response. What would the response be? Think about the response. Think about the response. Finally, put yourself in the place of a nurse in an aged care facility. This is the scenario. What would you do in this scenario? This is what the difficulties are in aged care. A female staff member reported that high care resident Alan masturbated when she assisted him in the shower. She was embarrassed and tearful. Others said he had also done it with them, and they didn't know what to do and said nothing. One staff member said she had asked him to stop, but he refused. His brain injury prevented him from knowing when it was appropriate to masturbate. He also wore large incontinence pads, which he couldn't actually get off himself, which prevented him from touching his genitals. Showering was the only time when he could masturbate. Now, how would you solve that problem? Think about it. He has the right to masturbate, doesn't he? What they are doing is preventing him from doing so. Preventing him. And what's preventing him? Two things. One is the regime of the aged care facility, and secondly, the incontinence pad. If you ever worn an incontinence pad, you'd know that it's particularly inducive to good sexual relationships. This incontinence pad is the secret to the solution to this problem. But they just ignore it, see? They just ignore it. Some cry about it, others ignore it, and they do nothing. So he gets worse and worse and worse because he gets more sexually frustrated, and he will lash out, as is commonly the case, because he can't sexually express himself. Now, my theory is a lot of people lash out in aged care because they can't sexually express themselves. That's it. Sweet dreams.